What if I told you that the physical limitations of a cheap, low-quality 2003 iPod earbud completely rewrote the sound of global pop music?
I mean, it sounds like a total conspiracy theory.
Yeah, total.
But it is actually entirely true. When audio files were being compressed into those early MP3s, the music itself literally had to physically change its shape. Like the structure had to change just to survive the digital translation. It was essentially adapt or die.
Wow. And the genre that adapted the best didn't just survive. It basically took over the planet. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
So for you, the listener who loves, connecting those invisible dots of cultural history, we've got an incredibly rich collection of material to explore today. We are looking at a comprehensive, decade-spanning column from MMR, which is Monumental Movement Records, and it details the complete, unfiltered history of 2000s R&B.
And wow, this is a massive history to unpack. We are talking about a 10-year span that is just endlessly fascinating because it functions simultaneously as this golden age and a really massive transition period.
Right.
You have this incredible, volatile collision of traditional soul, these emerging digital structures, and larger-than-life uncons, all colliding in the exact same recording studios.
And that is exactly our mission today. We're going to figure out exactly how R&B transformed from that warm, traditional, acoustic 90s soul into a digital, producer-led juggernaut that essentially conquered the world.
Okay.
Let's unpack this. To really understand the digital revolution of the mid-2000s, we have to first look at the acoustic foundation it was built on, right? Like, we have to start with a hangover from the 1990s.
Yeah, absolutely, because music doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
The 2000s inherited some incredibly sturdy, organic stylistic foundations from the 90s.
Oh.
We're talking about neo-soul. So the deeply emotional, live band acoustic vibes of artists like Erykah Badu, D'Angelo, Lauryn Hill, right, absolute legends. And running parallel to that, you had the grit of hip-hop soul, which was really championed by artists like Mary J. Blige.
So if you walk into a recording studio in the late 90s, you are literally smelling the physical analog tape. You're seeing like a live horn section warming up, a bassist tuning their instrument. It is a crowded, breathing, physical space.
Exactly.
And heading into the years 2000 to 2003, those traditional live soul elements are still heavily lingering in the air. You can still hear that classic vocal phrasing on the radio, but underneath those vocals, this very strange sonic tension is starting to build.
Yeah, and that tension is the defining characteristic of the early 2000s. Instead of just laying out a timeline, let's look at the clash of sounds happening right at the turn of the millennium.
Okay, lay it on me.
Take Alicia Keys' phenomenal debut, Songs in A Minor. You have this sweeping classical acoustic piano that feels completely timeless. But underneath it, the drum tracks aren't played by a live drummer. They are these twitchy, quantized, modern digital drum machine loops.
It's like walking into a grand centuries-old acoustic concert hall, but you suddenly realize the scaffolding holding the ceiling up is made of pulsing neon fiber optics.
Oh, that's a great way to put it, yes.
You still have that huge traditional soul vocal echoing through the room, but the structure underneath is becoming totally alien. You see it with Aaliyah working with Timbaland, where the beat sounds like it's from the year 2050, but the vocal is pure, silky R&B.
Right, and you see it in the massive global breakthroughs of Usher and Ashanti, and of course, Beyoncé's solo debut in 2003.
Yeah. Dangerously in Love?
Exactly. These tracks are massive commercial successes, but musically, they're straddling two completely different worlds. They're grounded in traditional R&B vocal delivery, but the beats backing them up are starting to stutter, fracture, and hit with this almost mechanical precision.
Which makes me wonder, and I really want your take on this, with traditional acoustic soul still so culturally dominant, were these early 2000s hits an evolution of the 90s, or were they a deliberate rebellion against them? Like, were they trying to kill the 90s?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it wasn't a rebellion at all, it was a bridge.
A bridge?
Yeah. These traditional vocalists weren't rejecting the soul of the previous decade. They were simply stepping into more dynamic, hip-hop influenced soundscapes just to see what would happen. They were testing the waters.
Oh, I see.
The artists and the producers were actively trying to figure out how to maintain the deep emotional resonance of a 90s track while incorporating the sheer rhythmic punch of modern hip-hop. It was a necessary and honestly highly lucrative testing ground for the complete fusion that was about to happen.
And that fusion didn't just happen, it violently took over. Because those early hybrid hits were so wildly successful, the architects behind them realized something huge.
They're producers.
Exactly, the producers. They realized that the public loved the digital scaffolding just as much as the concert hall itself. So they took full control of the steering wheel. That brings us to the era of 2004 through 2007, the producer takeover.
And this is where the sound of the entire decade truly solidifies. The music industry essentially handed the keys over to a core group of super producers. We are talking about visionaries like Timbaland, the Neptunes, which is Pharrell Williams and Chad Hugo, of course, Rodney Darkchild Jerkins, and Jermaine Dupri.
Heavy hitters.
Right. These guys stopped being just the people behind the mixing board. They became the main drivers of the genre. They were the marquee names.
Let's actually deconstruct what that sounded like for you, the listener, because the boundary between R&B and hip-hop didn't just blur, it essentially vanished.
Totally disappeared.
We start seeing a heavy, heavy reliance on massive synth bass, highly advanced electronic processing, and this really fascinating concept, the fragmentation and subdivision of beats.
Right, let's break that down. Think about a traditional drum beat from a live band. It's usually a steady, predictable groove that fills the room, a snare hits on the 2 and the 4. The cymbals are constantly crashing, filling up all the sonic space.
Yeah, it's very dense.
But these producers did the exact opposite. They started slicing the beat up into tiny fractions. They programmed complex, jittery rhythm patterns that deliberately left massive amounts of empty space. It is a radically minimalist sound design.
It's almost like they took a standard drum loop and took a scalpel to it, cutting out all the audio between the drum hits. It actually reminds me of musical pointillism.
Oh, pointless.
That style of painting where if you stand up close to the canvas, it's just a bunch of disconnected dots of color and a ton of empty white space. But when you step back, those disconnected dots form a perfect, vibrant picture. That is exactly what a Timbaland or Neptune's beat feels like.
Yeah, that's spot on.
Up close, it's just a booming synthesized bass line, a clicking syncopated hi-hat, and then absolute silence. But you step back, and it forms this incredibly tight, undeniable groove.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. And into that empty space, they place the vocals. But even the vocals were changing. We really can't talk about this era without talking about the years 2006 and 2007, when T-Pain essentially redesigned the human voice.
By popularizing the heavy, stylized use of autotune.
Exactly.
And this wasn't just fixing a flat note here or there in the background. This was the first time we were really seeing algorithms actively shape a human performance on a massive scale. It's almost like T-Pain invited an algorithm into the vocal booth with him to be his duet partner.
Right. Autotune became a blatant, robotic, stylistic effect. It was a brand new instrument.
Yeah.
And this minimalist, heavily processed, producer-driven formula resulted in some of the biggest blockbuster albums of the century. Usher's Confessions in 2004 was the biggest selling album of the entire year across all genres. Then you have Mariah Carey's massive career resurgence in 2005 with the emancipation of Mimi, Justin Timberlake's Future Sex Love Sounds in 2006, and Rihanna's Good Girl Gone Bad in 2007.
Just hit after hit after hit.
Oh, yeah. To be a top-tier male R&B star like Usher, Chris Brown, or Neo, you couldn't just stand at a mic stand anymore. You had to be a triple threat. You had to be dancing, singing, and often producing or arranging your own material just to keep up with the tracks.
Okay, I have to push back on this dynamic a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
We are calling this the producer era. If the producer is the one doing the musical pointillism, fragmenting the beat, programming the synths, making all the structural choices, and bringing in the algorithms, doesn't the singer just become another instrument in the producer's toolkit? Like, who is the real artist here? Is the vocalist just a passenger on Timbaland's ride?
It is a totally valid question, but if you look at the landscape of the time, the vocalists were absolutely not just passengers. The producers built the stage, sure, but look at the unprecedented global leap of the female R&B vocalists during this exact window. Beyoncé, Rihanna, Mariah Carey, Alicia Keys, Ciara.
Right.
These women did not just obediently sing over pre-made beats, they commanded them. They pushed the genre's boundaries outward.
So they were actively bending those minimalist tracks to their own will.
Precisely. Through their sheer star power, their immense vocal adaptability, and their artistic vision, they pulled in elements of Jamaican dancehall, pure pop, and electronica. A minimalist beat is just a cold, empty skeleton.
Yeah, that's true.
These women provided the soul, the melody, and the sheer charisma that turned those skeletal beats into global, culture-defining anthems. The producer made the track interesting, but the vocalist made it a phenomenon.
That distinction really matters. The tension between the cold digital beat and the fiery human vocal is what made the era magic. Now, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because you couldn't have this fragmented, auto-tuned, producer-heavy era without a massive, invisible revolution happening entirely behind the scenes. The sound of the music changed because the tools used to make the music completely changed.
We are talking about the moment the music industry collides head-on with the digital technology revolution. The mid-2000s saw massive technological disruptions that altered the very physics of sound. First, let's look at the recording tools themselves. Digital audio workstations, or DIWs, became highly advanced and widely accessible.
And for those who might not know, a DIW is software programs like Pro Tools or Logic that allows you to record, mix, and edit an entire song right on a computer monitor. You aren't splicing heavy analog tape anymore. You are looking at sound waves on a screen as visual blocks that you can just drag and drop with a mouse.
What's fascinating here is that visual interface changes how you think about music. DIWs allowed producers to infinitely slice, copy, paste, and manipulate audio with microscopic precision. That complex beat fragmentation, that pointillism we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
that is only possible because DIWs let you visually cut out the empty space between the drum hits. It also allowed for incredible spatial effects, making the music sound three-dimensional,
Yeah.
moving sounds from your left ear to your right ear seamlessly.
It's wild. And while the way music was made was turning entirely digital, the way music was sold and consumed was undergoing an absolute tectonic shift. In 2003, Apple launches the iTunes Store. Suddenly, MP3 distribution is spreading across the internet like wildfire. Meanwhile, the traditional physical CD market begins to shrink dramatically. By 2009, digital delivery actually overtook physical sales in many major countries. Plus, YouTube launches in 2005, totally revolutionizing how music videos and dance choreography are shared across borders. It's like an asteroid hitting the Earth.
That's exactly what it was.
The asteroid wipes out the acoustic dinosaurs, and these nimble digital mammals, the producers, are the ones who thrive in the new environment.
But let's go back to that thought you opened the show with, the idea of the MP3 and the iPod earbud changing the actual music.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is the absolute symbiosis between the digital technology and the creative art.
Right, because an MT3, especially back in the early 2000s, was a heavily compressed audio file. In order to make the file size small enough to fit 1,000 songs in your pocket, the algorithm had to literally delete frequencies from the music. It chopped off the highest highs and the lowest lows. If you took a dense, crowded acoustic rock song with 4 guitars and live cymbals crashing everywhere, and you compressed it into an early MP3, it often sounded like muddy, distorted mush through those cheap white iPod earbuds.
But a minimalist Neptune's beat, with crystal clear isolated vocals, a sharp snapping snare, a booming digital bass line,
Yep.
and massive amounts of empty space, that cuts right through the digital compression. It survives the translation perfectly.
Wow.
In fact, it sounds incredible on early earbuds because there is no clutter to get muddied up. Form was completely following function.
So producers didn't just choose minimalism because it sounded cool. They arguably had to make catchier, more minimal beats just so the track would physically stand out and sound good on the dominant technology of the day.
Yes.
The physical limitations of an iPod literally influenced the arrangement of Billboard #1 hits.
And once that digital borderless landscape was established, the music had to constantly adapt to stay on top of the algorithm. Which brings us to the final phase of the decade, 2008 to 2009, the pivot.
The world is now fully connected online. Digital platforms are making music entirely borderless, and to maintain its absolute dominance on the global charts, R&B does what it always does. It evolves. It starts naturally absorbing the biggest, loudest global sounds of the internet age, specifically EDM, electronic dance music, and dance pop.
Shift in the late 2000s is massive and very sudden. Beyoncé releasing her double album I Am, Sasha Fierce in 2008 is a prime example of this duality. Suddenly, artists like Chris Brown, T-Pain, and Neo are dominating the charts with tracks that feature heavy, club-ready synthesizers and what we call four-on-the-floor dance beats.
And when we say 4 on the floor, we're talking about that relentless, driving bass drum that hits on every single beat of the measure. Boom, 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 boom. It's the heartbeat of a nightclub. The tempo of R&B goes way up, the energy goes through the roof, and the sound gets incredibly shiny, loud, and synthetic.
But alongside that high-energy, fist-pumping EDM pivot, there was another, much quieter revolution happening in 2009. A visionary producer and writer named The Dream becomes a central figure. Following his 2007 debut album, he pioneers a sound that is often referred to as ambient R&B.
So instead of the loud, aggressive club beats, ambient R&B goes in the exact opposite direction. It's moody, it's atmospheric, it heavily relies on those advanced spatial effects we mentioned inside the dies, using heavy reverb and delay to make the song feel like it's echoing inside a massive, empty, three-dimensional room.
Exactly. And both of these late 2000s shifts, the high-energy EDM stuff and the Dream's ambient, moody sound, acted as a direct bridge into the next decade. They set the absolute stage for the alternative R&B movement of the 2010s, clearing the path for the dark, cinematic sounds of artists like Frank Ocean and The Weeknd.
I have to ask a foundational question about genre here, though. If R&B in 2008 and 2009 is absorbing EDM, dance pop, and hip-hop, to the point where all the traditional boundaries completely vanish, does it lose its original identity? Does R&B stop being R&B, or does it simply become the new dictionary definition of pop music?
This raises an important question about how we even define genres today. But looking at the historical impact, this wasn't a loss of identity. It was the ultimate victory.
Interesting.
By breaking down the rigid barriers between 90s soul, electronic noise, dance music, and digital delivery, 2000s R&B established the very foundation of modern global music. It didn't lose itself. It expanded to encompass everything.
It essentially became the water that mainstream pop culture swims in.
Exactly. It was a decade of constant dynamic crossing of boundaries. You had the tension between tradition and innovation, the clash of acoustic soul and electronic sound, the power struggle between the vocalist and the producer, and the massive leap from analog tape to digital files. Because the artists navigated all those intersections so successfully, that 10-year span became the cornerstone of the global music we listen to right now.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's take a step back and look at the massive journey we just took today. In just a single decade, R&B traveled from the acoustic, physical warmth of neo-soul to the heavily processed, auto-tuned, EDM-infused global pop anthems that conquered the world. It was a perfect, chaotic storm.
It really was.
You had visionary producers using digital pointillism to fragment beats. You had larger-than-life icons like Beyoncé pushing vocal and physical boundaries to command those beats. And you had a digital tech revolution with MP3 compression and DAWs completely rewriting the physical rules of how audio worked.
It was a perfect storm that left a permanent, undeniable mark on how we process sound.
Next time you hear a modern pop hit on the radio, or you throw on a moody, atmospheric alt R&B track on your streaming playlist, listen closely to the beat. Listen to the empty space between the snare hits, the vocal processing, the synth bass. You'll know that you aren't just listening to today's music, you are actually listening to the echoes of 2004. You're hearing the direct result of those producers and vocalists rewriting the DNA of music.
And as we close out today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building directly on that history. We talked about T-Pain inviting an algorithm into the vocal booth with auto-tune, and how the digital BIW revolution completely upended traditional acoustic instrumentation. It was a terrifying but liberating time for creators.
Absolutely.
Well, today we find ourselves in the age of generative AI, where algorithms can instantly compose beats, mimic human vocals, and generate entire songs from a simple text prompt. Could artificial intelligence disrupt today's digital laptop producers in the exact same way those laptop producers disrupted traditional acoustic musicians 20 years ago? Are we simply waiting for the next digital adaptation to force music to change its shape again?
That is a fascinating and honestly a pretty terrifying question to leave off on. A huge thank you to you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep exploring the hidden mechanics behind the art you love, and we'll catch you on the next one.